All right, 911.
I got a car, and these gentlemen saying, how long you been running? It's like 1 o'clock this morning. He might be dead. Looks like blood or something on his jacket.
You say you can tell he has blood on his jacket?
Yeah, he's out like a light. And it looks like something on his jacket. I don't know what it is. Looks like blood or something.
Can you see if he's moving at it? Can you look at his chest and see if he's moving at all?
I think he's dead. Hey, buddy, wake up. He's stiff right here. Could be a murder scene or something like that. He looks dead.
Isle of Wight, Virginia Sheriff's deputies raced to the scene of an unresponsive male found inside a car.
As I'm driving to the scene, in the back of my mind, I am preparing for the worst thing possible.
We've got a male subject cold to the touch inside of a Mustang. Paging out medics now.
I realized this could be something a little bit more serious, so I activated my lights and sirens and body camera at that time. The priority is always, when I first get on scene, is always check for safety and the well-being of that subject and check to make sure he still is alive. Y'all know this man?
No, I don't know him. I saw him.
Just an icon from America again, please.
Okay, who opened the door?
I did.
You did? Okay.
I touched it, just the thing of the door there and the glass, and I touched him. And,
Whose house is it?
huh?
Whose house is this?
This is my house.
This is your house?
Uh-huh.
You don't know him?
I have no idea.
Okay.
None whatsoever.
I'm gonna get everybody back up real quick.
Yeah.
I'll get back with you in a minute. When I approached the vehicle, I could see the victim sitting in the driver's seat, hunched over. I then checked for any sign of life, touched the victim. He did feel very stiff, was cold to the touch, and there was no pulse at all. There was way too much blood on scene for it to be just an overdose, so that's when the hair started to stand up on the back of my neck, and I started to realize that this may be a homicide. Unit 18.
Unit 18.
Who's the on-call investigator?
Unit 9.
Once I realized this could be a murder scene, I started taping the scene off and getting everybody back to preserve the integrity of the scene and any evidence that may be inside of it.
Within minutes, EMS arrives on scene.
I was gonna check him out.
Okay.
Since it's a crime scene, might as well keep as many out.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Is he stiff?
Yeah. He's been there for a while. He's slumped over at the wheel. I haven't done a whole lot. I ain't moved him around a whole lot. It looks like he just threw up blood.
DOA, can I have the time, please?
1227. Thank you, sir. The medics arrived on scene. They come over and officially declare the victim deceased.
Officers move quickly to identify the victim.
After I secure the scene, I go into my investigation and start running the tag of the vehicle, seeing who the vehicle comes back to, and trying to get that DMV photo up to see if that truly is who is operating the vehicle at that time. Let me run him. I haven't ran him yet. He looks younger, though. I'm gonna run this tag. See if I can get the DMV picture real quick. Casey Cagle. White male. Yes, this is him, I do believe. Good for a name. Casey, and then C-A-G-L-E is his last name.
Got a date of birth.
01.
That's a waste, isn't it?
That's crazy. The victim is identified as 19-year-old Casey Dakota Cagle. As soon as I see his date of birth come up on that DMV return as 2001 and see the photo, and kind of hits me that, you know, this is a young kid. Seeing the DMV photo of Casey alive and well, and then picturing his body back in my mind as I'm sitting there looking at it, it's hard.
Casey was my grandson. I adopted Casey when he was 6 months old. And I raised him by myself until he was about 4, and I had to go back to work. Every time I went somewhere, Casey went with me. Casey, as a child, was very happy, very energetic, and curious about everything. He loved dinosaurs. He knew the name of every dinosaur, and at the age of 6, he could spell them. He was just a big bundle of joy to have around. That morning when I got up, I noticed Casey wasn't at the house. He had a girlfriend, and I figured he had spent the night with her. We didn't know anything was wrong with Casey until the sheriff showed up. He said, Casey's been involved in a shooting, and he passed away. I couldn't believe they had the right guy. I said, well, how do you know it was him? And they said, they know it's him. They saw his wallet. They got his car registration. They know they have the right person. And I said, well, I want to see him. I want to make sure. And they told me I couldn't. Casey didn't have any issues with anybody, not even getting in any fights or altercations. It's still hard to believe that he's dead. It's almost like it wouldn't surprise me if he came in the door.
The victim's address on his DMV return was in Sedley, Virginia. And that kind of stuck out to me because it's a neighboring county, probably 20, 30 minutes away from us. At this point, I'm thinking, how did Casey end up in this driveway? What was he here for? Why was he here? Who was going to meet him here? What happened to this young man was a complete mystery. And we're now on the hunt for a murderer.
Investigators arrive on scene to remove the body of 19-year-old Casey Cagle from his vehicle.
We're going to have to remove him out of the vehicle to see what else is inside. Are there shell casings in the vehicle? To give us more evidence of what exactly was going on that night.
Want to slide a little closer?
While we were searching the vehicle, we did locate Casey's phone. We bagged Casey's phone for evidence to have our forensic unit go through it. We pulled the victim out onto the body bag and we start going through and inspecting the body. We did see Casey had a firearm in his front waistband. The weapon was still in the holsters. After removing it, we did see that the magazine was full and that there was still a round chambered, letting us know that that weapon was never fired that night.
10-4,
We turned him over onto his side, and at that point, we did see a gunshot wound behind his right ear in the head, and it appeared to be from a very close range.
There'd be a casing laying somewhere, though.
Based on that close range gunshot wound in the back of Casey's head, we knew someone had to be either in the back seat or kind of beside him with Casey turning his head away. So there had to be some sort of casing somewhere inside the vehicle that we needed to find. After further searching the vehicle, we did end up locating a single S&B 9mm shell casing wedged between the passenger seat and the console. All signs were pointing to this shell casing went to the weapon that likely killed Casey. Now we need to find who actually pulled the trigger and left this casing behind. Obviously, this case is just getting started at this point.
Investigators speak with witnesses on the scene, starting with the 911 caller.
The 911 caller, he identifies himself as the homeowner of where Casey's vehicle was parked at.
What time did you get home?
Oh, I just got home about 11 o'clock or so.
Okay.
I don't live here.
All right.
I went dropped my rent track off at the office.
Okay.
And I came here to check on my tenant. And then boom, I just saw that guy there.
Okay. Were you the one that called?
Huh?
Did you call 911?
Yeah, I called 911.
Okay.
Now, is he deceased or something?
Yeah, appears to be. Was your tenant home last night?
Yeah, she's right there.
Okay.
I tell him this is a safe place.
It is.
See, it is a safe place. It just happens you happen to be right there.
He lets us know that he's never seen Casey before, he's never seen that vehicle before, didn't expect anybody to be parked there. Now we're thinking in our minds, does the tenant know Casey? Did she call Casey over? Were they supposed to be meeting? Did she hear a gunshot?
You told the guys you don't know this vehicle or you don't know this individual. And what time did you notice the vehicle out there?
I didn't. When my landlord came, he said, you know, you turn your driveway. I said, no. And I looked out.
Now, do you have a daughter?
I do.
That's the only daughter you have?
Yes.
Okay. We're just trying to make sure that there is no relation between you or your daughter and him.
My daughter lives in Berkeley.
Is that a trailer court?
No.
Okay. Just to make sure. And you live here alone?
Yep.
The tenant did mention that she did have a daughter, so we start to think, was the daughter the link to Casey being there at the trailer that night?
Sorry that you had to have this happen, but we can't give you an answer because we do not know why he's sitting in your driveway. Just it's one of those random things.
Should I be worried?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Just keep your eye open if you have, any suspicions.
I feel like an idiot. I mean, because I didn't even notice this. I mean, I did hear, like I told the other officer last night, a little bit of talking from the people across the street, but that's not unusual at all.
Your landlord, does he check on you pretty regularly, or is that just an odd coincidence?
He came to pay the lot rent. He lives in Virginia Beach, so when he's out this way, he'll stop.
Gotcha. Okay.
So,
If you have any questions, you can give us a call to the sheriff's office. Okay?
that was my biggest question. Should I be scared?
After speaking with the tenant, she told us she didn't know what was going on, did not know the victim in the vehicle. She seemed very concerned about what happened, but did not hear anything. Looking further into the tenant and her daughter, we found out that there was no connection to Casey, so the mystery of Casey's homicide was deepening by the second.
After speaking with neighbors and actually where his vehicle was found, it was very strange for Casey to be there. So at that point, we didn't know if we had someone inside of the trailer park that committed the murder. We needed to try to establish a timeline for Casey arriving there at the trailer park.
Investigators obtain surveillance video from the trailer park and head back to the station.
We just spent a significant amount of time going through hours and hours and hours of surveillance video just trying to find a clue. We were able to see Casey's vehicle, his blue Mustang. We were able to tell exactly when that came in, around 9 that night. but he was proceeding at a speed that indicated to us that he was unfamiliar with the area, or he was looking for a very specific address or looking for an individual that may have been outside to meet.
And that was the last time Casey Cagle was seen.
While looking at the surveillance video, we didn't identify any other vehicles coming and going that were suspicious or raised any sort of concern at that time.
And it appears that the time that Casey entered the trailer park, he was killed shortly there afterwards. And at that point, we were very concerned that did we have someone within the trailer park that lived there that killed him, or there was someone in the area. But there was a sense of urgency to solve this case for the safety of our citizens of Isle of Wight County. Our next plan in the investigation was to interview his family members and friends to find out what Casey's life was, what kind of person he was, and maybe they may have some information of who he was going to meet or if he was with someone else that night.
I'm Investigator Lacey. This is Investigator Edward. You can see right there.
Investigators reach out to Casey's mother.
So we are assigned with investigating Casey's death, okay?
What is your relationship with Casey? Are y'all close? Do y'all talk regularly?
Yes, we're very close. We've always talked regularly. We've never not talked regularly. Casey was fairly isolated. I mean, he hung out with his girlfriend. Before her, he was always isolated. He was always talking about us getting a house together, me, him, and my daughter, and his girlfriend and all, because he loved his sister very much. She's 11 years old. I do not feel like he would have killed himself at all. He hasn't made a threat like that since he was a very hormonal teenager and going through way too much, more than any teenager should have to go through. I know, because I went through it too with my dad. And I did my best to get him out of there, and I did for a time. He, I think, was talking about it, and we sent him to a hospital to get better. He never talked it like that again, and never would at all. I mean, not without, I don't think he would have without at least mentioning it to someone first that he was having thoughts like that. Like, as in the past, when he had thoughts like that before, he let the thoughts be known. And he actually wanted help, so I don't see how when he was happy. I've never seen Casey as happy as he was when he was with I mean, she may be younger than him. I don't necessarily see a big problem with their age difference as long as her parents are okay with it. He loved that girl, man, and he was happy with her. Every time I saw him, he was so happy.
When was the last time you talked to Casey?
Maybe about a week ago.
Did Casey ever talk to you about anybody that was bothering him, or that he was afraid of, or that he was concerned about?
Never.
Casey have a job?
Not to my knowledge. He's always said that he's looking for work. He's gotten a few jobs, but then stopped working. He never holds the job. But it's because he's got another source of income.
I understand that you made a statement that maybe he was dealing some kind of drugs.
He was.
After we learned that Casey had potentially sold narcotics, that kind of changed our focus a little bit.
He was supposed to be making a delivery that night.
But now we're thinking that maybe this was a drug deal. Maybe he was going to meet someone to sell drugs, or going to meet someone to get drugs, and it just turned sour.
How do you know that?
Because I talked to his girlfriend, and she said that he was supposed to make a delivery, and that but that when he left, he said that he wasn't going to do it.
Did his girlfriend say who he was going to meet?
She just said a delivery. She probably wouldn't have known their names. Knowing Casey, I doubt he would have even told her that.
How would Casey know in that trailer park?
I have no idea.
When Mom told us about Casey's girlfriend, that really gave us an avenue to go down. Individuals may not share things with their parents, but the ones that are probably the closest to us at that age, and the ones that know us the best, are our significant others. We're trying to get to the bottom of it.
I do appreciate y'all's time.
Yeah, thank you for coming in.
We were really interested to talk to her, to find out who Casey's friends were, And also if she knew where he was going. You know, was she with him in the car? We didn't know if she potentially was a witness to this crime.
Investigators contact Casey's girlfriend, who agrees to come into the station for an interview.
When she arrived with her parents. They were obviously concerned as to what their daughter was doing with a death investigation. We quieted them down, and it was important to us to separate mom and dad from the girlfriend. We really wanted to get her alone. We wanted to make her comfortable, and we knew that she was probably going to share some information with us that mom and dad maybe didn't want to hear. And we needed those answers, and we needed the truthfulness out of her.
Part of my job is finding the truth. Okay, so I need you to tell me the truth about anything you know. Obviously, we're here to talk about Casey. Okay, I know it's emotional. All right, I know it's tough.
Obviously, she was extremely emotional. It seemed like they were very close. She was very soft-spoken. Seemed very, very emotional, very torn up about the incident, about the loss of her boyfriend.
When was the last time that you talked to Casey?
I think it was Sunday, the last time he called me. And, so like I said, we were arguing, and I kept hanging up, he kept calling, and he kept hanging up too. But the last time he called, he told me, because actually he's supposed to do a delivery for somebody.
What kind of delivery?
Cause he sell marijuana and stuff, and he's supposed to see I think 2 people.
Okay.
But he's supposed to drive there. But we kept arguing because of this girl, but he called me and he said that he's not in the mood anymore.
Is that not in the mood to argue with you, or not in the mood to sell drugs?
I guess both, because I guess I pissed him off, and I think I just made him like not in the mood for like delivering it, you know, meeting those 2 people. I don't know.
Did he say what the 2 people's names were?
I think I asked him, but I forgot the name.
Did he say where he was supposed to make the delivery?
Let me think. I think I asked him. Oh, no, actually, no, I didn't ask him that time because, like I said, we were arguing about this girl.
Okay. So when he was arguing on the phone with you, he was supposed to be going to deliver drugs.
When she told us that they were having a fight, that really piqued our interest.
So at that point, it kind of stood out to us of, you know, how bad was the fight? What was it about? And could it give her a motive to do it?
Who was the girl y'all were arguing over?
The girl, I only know her name because I saw it on Snapchat.
When we pressed her a little harder, she provided the information this fight was about a girl, and the name that she gave us was Anna. Now we have a name, and we don't know what Casey's relationship with this girl was. We don't know who she is. We don't know where she lives. We don't know if Anna was with Casey on the night that he was killed.
We didn't know if she was just trying to steer us in another direction of another person to take the heat off of her.
It's really, really important for us to track down Anna, and we need to do so quickly because this was obviously a hot bed for this couple and caused them to argue potentially minutes before Casey was killed.
Investigators track down Anna, the subject of an argument between Casey and his girlfriend on the night of his murder.
So we were able to figure out who Anna was, and she came down to the office to talk to us. So Anna tells us a very different story than Casey's girlfriend does.
I'm investigating the death of Casey.
She said that her and Casey were just friends. They would just check in on each other every now and then, but they weren't this romantic relationship that the girlfriend kind of led them out to be.
What kind of prompted you guys talking?
He posted something, I swiped up on his story and I said, "Are you okay?" And he just started like calling me just crazy stuff. And that wasn't like him. So I asked him, I said, "What is going on with you? What's wrong?" And he started texting me in like Spanish. Yeah. From Saturday, that's the only thing that I have saved, and he saved it. But it was just stuff like that he was texting me, and he just kept cussing me out. And then I stopped texting him, and a few minutes later, he texted me and said, "Sorry, that was my girl. She took my phone," and she said all that. And it's just weird because I never ever knew him to have a girlfriend. He's never told me he had a girlfriend, or I mean, at one point he even wanted to take me out, but because I know his main places were Suffolk, Wakefield, Windsor, Smithfield, Sedley, like the surrounding area basically. He would travel, just drive.
We were able to see those messages, and her and Casey's relationship wasn't anything like the girlfriend thought it was.
Have you heard anything about what happened to him?
All I've heard was that he was just shot one time, and I'm assuming robbed. I think you should just question the girlfriend. I don't know why. I've just had this really weird feeling. I don't know. I think she could have set him up probably.
Anna does indicate that the relationship between Casey and his girlfriend may have been a little more rocky than we originally anticipated. She kind of pointed the finger back at her. With the statement that Anna provided, we don't think she's directly involved in Casey's death, but that kind of gave us a lot more questions for the girlfriend we needed to drill down on for her. And based on the information that we have right now, there really wasn't anything concrete pointing at the girlfriend. We still did not have a viable suspect in Casey's death.
As the investigation stalls, a family grieves.
Everybody lives out of town. So most of Casey's service was done over the phone and done in portions. Otherwise, it wasn't one big service, it was a bunch of small ones. And everybody crying. Nobody could understand why it happened or who would do it or why they would do it. It was all guesswork about whether it was a robbery or what. It's just the way he was that will make you never forget him. If you knew him, even his teachers showed up at the house with flowers. Different people that I didn't know, that Casey knew and didn't know for long, showed up. So he was a very likable person. Even though he was cremated, I still expect him to walk in. We've got pictures of him all around. And he stayed with me for so long that there was just little things that would remind you of him that he did.
Up to that point, we were sitting scratching our heads. Why was Casey in that trailer park specifically, and why was he parked where he was? We didn't have a link.
Detectives turned to Casey's cell phone records and social media for answers.
While going through Casey Cagle's cell phone records, it was determined we saw some messages that were from a Shaman Wilkerson that night, around the time that we think Casey was murdered.
We needed to know who Shaman was, and we were able to identify that Shaman's mom lived in Beaverbrook Manor, about 4 houses down from where Casey was found. This was huge for us. This was a big thing. We were finally able to potentially show a link as to why Casey was in that trailer park. And we have an individual Casey may have been there to meet. This is an individual that may have been related to the death of Casey. We don't have time to play around.
I was digging into Shaman Wilkerson, trying to get some intel about him. It was determined that he was in a gang out of Southampton County. The sense of urgency had increased because, knowing his history, he more than likely had a firearm in his possession.
Investigators successfully locate Shaman at the trailer park and bring him in for questioning.
When Shaman comes down to the station, our interview tactics are a little bit different. We want to know his involvement. The kid's gloves have come off. We needed to know why Casey was found dead 4 houses down from where his mom lived.
You do have the right to remain silent, okay?
Yes,
anything you say can be used against you in a court of law.
Yes, sir. You see my hands? I'm nervous.
I think you have reason to be nervous. I don't think you understand the seriousness of this. Like, you're not down here talking to the police in regards to a homicide investigation.
That's right. Yeah,
like, this is somebody died, man.
He kept reiterating that he didn't have anything to do with harming Casey, killing Casey, or even knowing Casey was in the trailer park.
Let me ask you a question. Did you kill him?
No.
We pushed him on a little harder, and he eventually seems like he's really on the verge of sharing the information that he didn't want us to know.
To be honest with you, I ain't gonna lie to y'all now, because it's big.
So he discloses that he was hanging out with some friends at his house, and the name that he gives us is a guy that goes by the name of Ghost. This name Ghost immediately sent bells and whistles off in my head. I had seen that name on Casey's phone. I recognized it as a Snapchat username that messaged Casey very close to the time that we believe Casey died.
Was Ghost at your house with you?
Yeah, he was at my house, but my mom was walking. Literally like 5 minutes after she left, he was gone.
Where did he go?
I have no clue.
Okay.
I jump in the shower, I get out. My mom get home around like 6 something. He's still not there. Boom. That was around like, time went by, that was around like 8 something, 9.
That's important information for us. Now we have this guy that may be an enemy of Casey, and we don't know where he was for about 2 to 3 hours, but we know that he was probably in close proximity to where Casey was found.
And we were like, oh, this could be our piece of the puzzle right here that we need.
What do you think? You think Ghost killed that boy?
You got enough in him to take a life?
I don't know. Good dog.
So during the interview with Shaman, he stated that Ghost's first name was Jalen. So we have other detectives working behind the scenes and trying to connect Ghost and Jalen to see if there was anything in a database that would link the two, and we were able to find out that his name was Jalen Freeman.
So we know that Shaman's not being completely truthful with us. We know there's more information that we're going to need from Shaman, but we got to find Jalen. You know, if Jalen was the one that may have been the trigger man, the one that killed Casey, he's the most dangerous. We know where Shaman is. We don't know where Jalen is.
The hunt for him began at that point. We started putting out social media posts about it, with people coming forward if they have any information.
It's then that investigators receive an anonymous tip that could point them in the direction of their latest suspect.
The big break in the case was we got a crime line tip from an individual that said he got a call from Jalen, and Jalen was trying to flee the state. He said the police were on to him, and when this caller asked him why, he said, I shot that boy in Beaverbrook Manor. I killed that kid. I've got to get out of here. So we had to move fast that night. We were able to find a guy who wanted to remain confidential, but he was extremely cooperative. And he gave us information about a vehicle that Jalen got into after he dropped him off, and we were able to track that vehicle to an apartment complex in the city of Franklin.
This young man, he's desperate. He's desperate to flee the state. Is he desperate enough to take someone hostage? Desperate to kill someone else? You don't know what's going through his mind, so we had to come in full force and take him into custody.
So once the canine tracked the scent to a specific door, all of our senses become heightened. Right, our murderer may be just behind this door.
Investigators close in on their suspect, Jalen Freeman, and prepare for a confrontation.
Hey, how are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
And if he's cornered, the last thing we want him to do is come out shooting.
J.Lee Freeman, Franklin Police Department, come out with your hands up!
It's an extremely dangerous situation. He showed a propensity for the taking of human life, and we don't want to be next. You know, we want to make sure that we go home to our families, and every one of those apartments go home to their families.
Franklin Police Department, come out with your hands up!
5-0 all units, J4.
It's stressful. I mean, you're trying to calm yourself down, you're trying to calm your adrenaline down, calm your nerves down. Jalen comes out of a back room. He actually belly crawls out. He's taken into custody.
Put your hands behind your back.
There's not time for relaxation. We've still got to go in this apartment.
Unknown, right?
We'll get this closed. Watch this closed.
We don't know if Jalen acted alone, and we don't know what danger lies within that apartment.
Anybody else? Go down. Franklin Police! Franklin Police! Franklin Police!
We didn't locate a murder weapon that night, but we were able to locate a phone linked to Jalen hidden behind a panel in a wall in a closet.
All right, apartment's on lockdown.
It was just more corroboration that Jalen was one of the last people to message Casey alive, and we know that Jalen was in the area at the time that Casey was killed.
Back at the station, investigators question their suspect.
We wanted to calm him down, and we wanted to keep him in the present. We didn't want him thinking long term. We didn't want him thinking about what the consequences were or what was going to happen tomorrow. We wanted him to just stay in the conversation with us, and we wanted him to just tell us the story.
Tonight's, you're in the spotlight, man. We want to hear your story. We want to hear your side to the story. Okay? I know that you know Casey Cagle. Okay? I know that you were there that night. All right.
I know Casey through school. I don't even know when I talked to him. I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't know what time I talked to bro.
Okay. Why was Casey in Beaverbrook?
Bro wanted to smoke. He hit me up.
Did he text you on, message you on Snapchat?
Snapchat.
He knew you were in Beaverbrook Manor?
I told him I was in Beaver.
Okay.
So initially, Jalen is not being truthful with us. We want to know what happened in that car, with Casey. So we give him a theory. We give him the opportunity to give us a little bit more truth. One of the theories that we gave him was maybe this was self-defense, right? Casey had a gun. Casey sells drugs. Maybe you were scared. Help us understand. He bites on the bait, hook, line, and sinker.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you straight up. I ain't want to snitch on dude, but hey, it is what it is. Look, bro really wanted me to buy some weed, for real. He wanted me to buy some weed straight up.
Okay.
No, bro, I want to buy your weed, man, for real, straight up. Then it just went from there, straight up. On sitting there, he texted somebody, and I see a pistol right here.
Okay.
See a pistol right there in his waist. Bro, can I leave now? I'm about to just go ahead and go. Like, nah, I need that money. What do you mean money? Nah, I'm not getting none of my money. I'm not about to spend this on you, for real, for real. He tried to reach. I'm gonna be for real. He tried to reach. I already knew he had a pistol.
Sure.
He tried to reach. I do how I got the I don't have my own pistol, but I had a pistol.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what happened? Tell me exactly what happened. He reaches for his pistol. What happened?
Casey's gun was holstered in his holster. His shirt was pulled over top of it, so it looked like it had never been disturbed or touched. So we knew that was false.
To be real, it's too fast. Like, as soon as I talk, he's still reaching.
Okay.
I mean, let off 2 shots.
You fired 2 shots? Okay. Did you hit him with both shots? Just hit him with one? Where did you hit him?
Like right here. God, I ain't gonna count. I drew. I had my pistol like open. I had my pistol open.
What kind of gun did you have?
I had a 9.
And now we have Jalen admitting to shooting Casey in the car in a conversation involving drugs. We keep pushing Jalen about this firearm. Where did this gun come from?
You making yourself look like a cold-blooded killer. Scoop, goddamn.
Jalen admitted that he took Shamon's gun with him to the scene. So now we have intent.
We had enough evidence to charge Jalen Freeman with Casey Cagle's homicide. We knew that our investigation was not over. We needed to focus back on Shamon. We executed a search warrant at Shamon Wilkerson's residence in Beaverbrook Manor. And we found a magazine that belonged to a 9mm handgun. The ammunition matched the cartridge case that was found in Casey Cagle's vehicle when he was shot and killed. We were able to arrest Shamon Wilkerson on complicity charges associated with Casey Cagle's homicide.
Based on the evidence of Casey's phone, Jalen's story, and the evidence that were recovered during the search warrant, Jalen messaged Casey to order up some drugs. He enters into conversation with Shamon that they're gonna rob Casey. He gets a gun from Shamon. He walks down to where Casey parked, climbs in the passenger seat. At some point in time, Jalen pulls a firearm and shoots Casey one time in the head. Casey didn't pull his gun. This was a cold-blooded killing. This was someone who didn't care about Casey's life, and all he cared about was drugs. After Jalen leaves the vehicle, he takes the drugs from Casey. He goes back to meet Shamon, and they get in a car and they go to a party. They don't call 911. They probably don't think another time about Casey that night while he's laying dead in a car. This was the youngest person that I'd worked a homicide investigation for. He was a 19-year-old kid, right? He had a girlfriend, he had a mom, he had a family that cared about him and a family that loved him.
Jalen Freeman pleads guilty to second-degree murder and is sentenced to 40 years in prison with 30 years suspended. Shamon Reed Wilkerson is convicted of accessory after a homicide and is sentenced to 2 years of supervised probation.
Everybody grieves in their own way. And me personally, I still can't believe he's dead. I miss his presence. Just being with him. Being able to go fishing with him. Helping him fix his car. There's nothing that I won't miss. It's not a day that goes by that something happens that reminds you of him. So it's not like you ever forget.
The call came in just after 3 in the morning, a sharp ring slicing through the quiet of a Manhattan apartment building, the kind of ring that doesn't belong to drunk mistakes or wrong numbers, but to moments that change things forever, and somewhere between the second and third ring, a woman stopped existing in the ordinary sense of the word and became something else entirely, a name, a file, a mystery that New York City would carry like a bruise for decades. The winter of 1995 had wrapped the city in a hard, unforgiving cold, the kind that turned breath into fog and made every footstep echo longer than it should, streets glittering with frozen slush under streetlights, taxis crawling like yellow beetles through avenues that never truly slept. And in that cold, time seemed sharper, edges cleaner, as if anything broken would shatter instead of bend. Her name was Eleanor Whitman, 32 years old, living alone in a rent-stabilized one-bedroom on the Upper East Side. A life so meticulously structured that her friends often joked she moved through the city on invisible rails, always on time, always prepared, always aware. Eleanor worked as a junior editor at a respected publishing house near Midtown, a job that rewarded patience, attention to detail, and the ability to notice what others skimmed past. And she was good at it, quiet but incisive, the kind of woman who listened more than she spoke and remembered everything she heard. Her days followed a rhythm that rarely changed. An early jog along the East River, coffee from the same cart on 72nd Street, a subway ride downtown with a paperback folded neatly in her bag, evenings spent marking manuscripts in red ink while a jazz station murmured softly from an old radio. It was a small life by New York standards, but it was orderly, intentional, and it left very little room for chaos. That's why no one panicked when she didn't answer her phone Monday morning. In New York, unanswered calls were common. Missed trains, delayed meetings, excuses stacked as high as the buildings themselves. But by lunchtime, Eleanor still hadn't shown up at the office, her desk untouched, her coat missing from the back of her chair, and by early evening, concern had begun to curdle into something heavier. When her supervisor finally contacted the building superintendent to request a wellness check, the city was already settling into darkness again. Another day closing without her. The apartment door was unlocked when the super arrived, a detail that would haunt the case like a refrain. Unlocked but undamaged. No signs of forced entry. No splintered wood or twisted metal, as if whoever crossed that threshold had been expected. Inside, the apartment was immaculate, almost staged in its normalcy. The bed was made. The bathroom sink was dry. Eleanor's winter coat hung neatly on its hook. On the kitchen counter sat a mug with the faint ring of dried coffee at its bottom, cold and untouched. And on the small dining table, placed with deliberate care, was an envelope. It wasn't stamped. It wasn't addressed. It held no return name. Just a single word written across the front in dark, heavy ink. Eleanor. The first responding officers felt it immediately, that intangible wrongness that can't be logged into reports, the way the silence pressed in, thick and expectant, the sense that the room itself was aware of what had happened. They called it in, secured the scene, waited for detectives who arrived carrying cameras, gloves, and the quiet discipline of men and women who had seen too many endings. They photographed every surface, measured every corner, cataloged every object. But the apartment resisted interpretation. There was no blood, no struggle, no sign of haste, just absence. When they opened the envelope, the air seemed to tighten. Inside was a single sheet of paper, stark white, the words written in block letters, pressed so hard they left grooves you could feel with a fingertip. You shouldn't have looked. Those 4 words shifted the gravity of the room. This was no accident, no random disappearance. This was a message, and messages are meant to be received. By the time the paper reached the precinct, the phrase had already begun to circulate, whispered among officers, repeated with slight variations, each retelling amplifying its menace. Someone had wanted Eleanor to understand why she was gone, and someone else wanted the police to understand it too. The investigation moved quickly at first, as they always do when the trail is still warm. Detectives mapped Eleanor's last known movements, pulled phone records, subpoenaed bank statements, interviewed coworkers, friends, neighbors. Everyone described the same woman. Reliable, cautious, intelligent. No history of drug use. No abusive relationships. No obvious enemies. She paid her rent on time. She returned her library books early. She lived like someone who didn't want to draw attention, and yet attention had found her anyway. At her office, detectives discovered something that didn't belong. In the bottom drawer of her desk, beneath neatly stacked manuscripts and editorial notes, was a bundle of pages clipped together. No cover letter, no submission form, no author credit. It wasn't logged in the company system. It wasn't assigned to any editor. It simply existed, quietly, like a secret waiting to be found. As detectives read through it, their interest sharpened into alarm. This wasn't fiction. It was an analysis, painstaking and precise, of a financial scheme involving a mid-sized investment firm based in Lower Manhattan. The language was careful, coded, but unmistakable to anyone familiar with corporate malfeasance. Funds routed through shell companies. Transactions disguised as losses. Patterns that suggested long-term laundering rather than short-term fraud. Names were redacted, dates partially obscured, but the structure was there, And in the margins, Eleanor's handwriting traced a mind at work, arrows connecting accounts, notes questioning discrepancies, a private investigation conducted under the guise of editorial review. When detectives contacted the firm, they were met with polished denial. Executives expressed confusion. Lawyers appeared almost immediately. Questions were deflected. Meetings postponed. The firm insisted Eleanor had never contacted them, had no reason to investigate them, had no access to proprietary information. And then something happened that no one could quite explain. Within 2 days of being logged into evidence, the manuscript disappeared. There was no dramatic theft, no broken lock, no security footage showing a shadow slipping through a door. It was simply gone, signed out of evidence and never signed back in. A clerical error, someone suggested, a misplaced box, another shrugged. Paperwork was reviewed, signatures traced, but nothing definitive emerged. The most concrete lead in the case evaporated, leaving behind only suspicion and the growing sense that this investigation had brushed up against something it wasn't meant to touch. As the days passed, Eleanor's disappearance spread through the city. Her photo appeared on flyers taped to lampposts, on television screens during evening news segments, her face frozen in a polite smile that now felt painfully inadequate to the situation. Tips flooded in, reports of sightings from Brooklyn bodegas, Queens subway platforms, bus stations across state lines. Each one was followed. Each one led nowhere. Hope flared and died repeatedly, a cruel rhythm familiar to anyone who has ever waited for a missing person to come home. 3 nights after Eleanor vanished, her answering machine recorded a new message. It lasted 9 seconds. There were no words, only breathing, slow and controlled, close to the receiver, followed by a deliberate click. The call was traced to a payphone near Wall Street, but the trail ended there. No fingerprints, no witnesses, just another echo added to the growing void. Inside the precinct, the tone began to change. Not officially, not in memos or briefings, but in posture, in glances exchanged across desks, in conversations that dropped to whispers when unfamiliar ears entered the room. Detectives noticed that witnesses became harder to reach, that phone calls went unanswered, that one potential source abruptly recanted his statement, insisting he had never spoken to Eleanor, never seen the manuscript, never heard of the firm, his hands trembling as he spoke, fear radiating from him in waves. By the end of 1995, the case had slowed. There was no body to bury, no suspect to charge, no confession to extract. Eleanor Whitman became another file in a metal cabinet, another photograph pinned to a board, another unanswered question in a city full of them. The case was reassigned, deprioritized, quietly labeled a cold case, but the words on that paper never lost their heat. You shouldn't have looked. Years later, detectives would say that some cases announce themselves with violence, while others creep in silently and rot from the inside out. Eleanor's was the latter. No gunshots, no blood-soaked alley, just a locked city, an unlocked door, and the lingering sense that somewhere in New York, truth had been glimpsed for a moment, and the cost of that glimpse had been absolute. New York did what it always does after the first shock faded. Kept moving. Sirens overlapped, subways rattled on, office lights burned late into the night, and somewhere beneath that relentless momentum, the absence of Eleanor Whitman began to harden into a fact instead of a crisis. Her apartment stayed dark. Her phone stayed silent. Her life was reduced to copies and transcripts, but for the detectives still assigned to her case, the silence felt manufactured, as if the city itself were cooperating in forgetting her. They went back to the beginning, again and again, replaying her final days with obsessive precision. Friday evening, Eleanor had left work at 6:12 p.m. Security logs confirmed it. She stopped by her usual deli, paid in cash, ordered the same turkey sandwich she'd ordered dozens of times before. The cashier remembered her clearly, remembered nothing unusual. From there, she walked home. No detours, no meetings, no phone calls logged after 6:47 p.m. Her answering machine had no messages until the breathing call days later. On paper, Eleanor simply went home and evaporated. Detectives canvassed her building a second time, pushing harder, asking questions people didn't want to answer. An elderly tenant on the third floor mentioned seeing Eleanor in the stairwell late that night, talking to a man she didn't recognize. The man was well-dressed, she said. Dark coat, confident posture, the kind of person who didn't look like he belonged in a stairwell. Another neighbor claimed to have heard the elevator stop on Eleanor's floor around midnight, though the building's aging system often misfired. None of it was solid. All of it was suggestive. A composite sketch was drafted based on vague descriptions and half-memories. It went nowhere. As winter deepened, investigators shifted focus back to Eleanor's work, because the manuscript was the one anomaly that refused to fade. Without the original, they relied on notes, summaries, fragments recalled by officers who had skimmed it before it vanished. They consulted financial crime specialists who confirmed what the detectives already suspected. The scheme described in the manuscript wasn't amateur. It was sophisticated, patient, and designed to survive scrutiny. Whoever was behind it understood oversight, understood audits, understood exactly how much could be hidden in plain sight. And Eleanor somehow had begun to see it. The question that gnawed at everyone was how. Eleanor wasn't an accountant. She wasn't a regulator. She was an editor. Her access to financial records should have been non-existent, unless someone had given them to her, or unless she had stumbled across them indirectly, embedded in something else. Detectives returned to the publishing house, combed through submissions from the months leading up to her disappearance, searching for anything that might have served as a Trojan horse. Most were forgettable. Memoirs, thrillers, academic texts. Then they found it. A nonfiction proposal submitted under a pseudonym, rejected without comment, filed away and forgotten. It claimed to be an exposé of corporate culture in 1990s New York, thinly sourced, poorly written. But buried in its appendices were references, citations, fragments of data that didn't belong there. Account numbers disguised as examples. Transaction timelines framed as hypotheticals. To an editor skimming, it was junk. To someone paying attention, it was a map. Eleanor had paid attention. The author of the proposal could not be located. The contact information was fake. The postmark traced back to a Midtown drop box. Felt deliberate, like bait. Someone had put those documents into circulation knowing only a certain kind of reader would notice their weight. And Eleanor had noticed. Whether by curiosity or conscience, she had begun pulling the thread. Detectives began to suspect she had contacted someone about it. Someone outside the publishing house. Phone records revealed a series of brief calls to a number registered to a private payphone service. The kind used by businesses that didn't want paper trails. The calls stopped 3 days before she vanished. Whoever was on the other end never called back. Then came the first real break, months too late to matter the way it should have. A janitor working night shifts in a building near Wall Street came forward, nervous, reluctant, asking for immunity before he spoke. He said that in late November 1995, he'd overheard 2 men arguing in a stairwell, voices low but angry. One of them mentioned the editor, said she was asking questions, said it was becoming a problem. The other responded with a phrase that stuck with him because it sounded rehearsed, final. She shouldn't have looked. The janitor couldn't identify them, couldn't give faces, couldn't even swear to the date. But the words matched the note. That was enough to jolt the case back to life, briefly. Detectives leaned harder on the investment firm named in Eleanor's manuscript. They pulled old complaints, internal audits, civil suits quietly settled. Patterns emerged, but nothing illegal enough to charge, nothing clean enough to indict. The firm had insulated itself well, layers of plausible deniability stacked like armor. And then, slowly, the pressure eased again. Witnesses stopped cooperating. Requests for documents stalled. One detective recalled being pulled aside by a supervisor and told, in careful language, to manage expectations. Resources were limited. Priorities had shifted. There were fresher cases, louder cases, bodies on sidewalks that demanded attention. Eleanor's case was becoming inconvenient. Inside the department, rumors circulated. Whispers about phone calls from City Hall. About donors with interests. about unspoken lines you didn't cross if you wanted your career to remain intact. None of it was provable. All of it was believable. New York in the mid-1990s was cleaning itself up, selling a narrative of order and control. A missing editor tied to financial corruption didn't fit that story. Eleanor's family pushed back as hard as they could. Her mother called precincts daily. Her brother hired a private investigator who retraced the same steps, hit the same walls, reached the same dead ends. The investigator concluded what the police couldn't officially say. Eleanor hadn't disappeared. She had been removed. Years passed. Files yellowed. Detectives retired or transferred. Eleanor Whitman's name slipped from headlines to footnotes, from active investigation to archival reference. The apartment was eventually cleared. New tenants moved in. The envelope was sealed in an evidence bag, the ink fading slightly with time, the message still legible, still accusing. And yet, the case refused to die completely. In 2003, a financial crimes task force uncovered a massive laundering operation linked to multiple firms operating in the 1990s, including one that matched the structure described in Eleanor's manuscript. Indictments followed. Executives were charged. Plea deals were cut. Billions were accounted for retroactively. But Eleanor's name never appeared in court documents. Her role, whatever it had been, was never acknowledged. When asked about her during a deposition, one executive claimed he had never heard of her. Another smiled and said nothing. For detectives who remembered the case, the revelation was both vindication and insult. She had been right. She had seen something real, and it had cost her everything. The task force reopened old files, including Eleanor's, but too much time had passed. Evidence was compromised. Witnesses were dead or unreachable. The trail had gone cold long before the truth caught up to it. Officially, the case remained unsolved. No body, no charges, no closure. But unofficially, among those who had lived with it, the case had an ending of sorts. Eleanor Whitman had crossed paths with something powerful and invisible, something that moved money instead of weapons, silence instead of violence. Her disappearance wasn't a mystery born of randomness. It was a warning delivered quietly, efficiently, and erased just as cleanly. In a city that thrives on noise, Eleanor's story was swallowed by silence. Yet even now, decades later, detectives will tell you that some nights, when the city finally slows and the streets empty, they think about that unlocked door, that empty mug, that single sheet of paper left behind like a signature. Because some truths don't want to be uncovered, and some questions, once asked, demand a price that New York never itemizes, but never forgets either. Time does strange things to unsolved cases. It doesn't erase them so much as it thins them out, stretches them until the sharp edges blur and the urgency drains away, leaving behind a residue of doubt and unanswered questions. By the late 1990s, Eleanor Whitman's disappearance had settled into that uneasy state, no longer fresh enough to command resources, not old enough to be forgotten, hovering in a bureaucratic limbo where files were still accessible but rarely opened. And yet, beneath that surface stillness, the case continued to exert a quiet pull on the people who had touched it, like a low-frequency hum you can feel more than hear. Detective Michael Harrigan felt it most acutely. He had been a junior detective when Eleanor vanished, assigned to assist with interviews and paperwork, a peripheral role that somehow lodged itself deep in his memory. Harrigan was the kind of cop who believed patterns mattered, that crimes left shapes behind even when evidence disappeared, and Eleanor's case was all negative space, defined more by what wasn't there than what was. No body, no suspect, no confession. Just a woman who vanished after looking at something she wasn't supposed to see. In 1998, Harrigan transferred to the Financial Crimes Bureau, a move that felt coincidental at first, then increasingly inevitable. The deeper he went into white-collar investigations, the more familiar certain structures felt. Shell companies layered like nesting dolls, money looping through offshore accounts, legal gray zones treated like playgrounds by people who could afford the risk. Every so often, a file would cross his desk that made him think of Eleanor's manuscript, of the crude map she had begun to sketch before someone tore it from her hands. He began pulling old records quietly, unofficially, cross-referencing names from unrelated cases with the fragments he remembered from Eleanor's file. It was dangerous territory, not in the dramatic sense of gunfights and threats, but in the slower, more corrosive way that could stall a career. Still, Harrigan persisted, telling himself it was professional curiosity, not obsession, even as he stayed late nights, office lights burning while the city outside slipped into darkness. What he found wasn't a smoking gun, but it was something. A recurring consultancy firm, nominally legitimate, providing risk assessment services to multiple investment houses in the early 1990s. The firm's principals rarely appeared on paperwork. Their names shifted, their addresses changed, but the structure remained consistent, and so did their proximity to companies later implicated in laundering and fraud. Harrigan flagged it, mentioned it casually to a supervisor, watched the way the man's expression tightened for just a second before smoothing over. "Careful," the supervisor said. "That stuff gets complicated." Complicated was another word for radioactive. Meanwhile, Eleanor's family continued their own quiet campaign. Her mother aged visibly with each passing year, grief settling into her posture, her voice losing its edge as hope dimmed. Her brother Mark refused to let go entirely. He filed requests, appealed decisions, contacted journalists who were more interested in celebrity scandals than decade-old disappearances. Occasionally, a reporter would bite, an article would appear, a brief resurgence of attention would flare, then fade. The city had moved on. The story didn't. In 2001, after the September attacks reshaped New York's priorities overnight, Eleanor's case slipped even further into obscurity. Resources were redirected. Archives were reorganized. Old cases were boxed, digitized, compressed into databases where context flattened into metadata. Harrigan worried that something essential would be lost in that translation, some detail that only existed in the margins, in the memories of people who had been there. Then, unexpectedly, a letter arrived. It was sent to the precinct, addressed simply to missing persons. No return address, postmarked from Albany. Inside was a photocopy of a single document, a bank transfer receipt dated November 1995, partially redacted, showing a large sum moved between two shell accounts. Scrawled in pen at the bottom were 3 words. She found this. The document alone wasn't enough to reopen the case officially, but it was enough to stir old embers. Harrigan recognized the account structure immediately. It matched the patterns he had been tracking for years. Someone out there knew Eleanor had uncovered something specific, something tangible, and they wanted the police to know it too, or maybe they wanted to unburden themselves. Or maybe it was a provocation. The sender was never identified. Fingerprints were inconclusive. Surveillance cameras at the Albany post office had long since overwritten their tapes. Another ghost, another fragment. As Harrigan dug deeper, he began to notice subtle resistance. Requests delayed. Files missing. Meetings canceled without explanation. No one told him to stop outright, but the message was clear enough. He was circling territory that belonged to someone else. At home, his wife noticed the change, the way he checked their locks twice, the way he paused before answering unfamiliar calls. Harrigan dismissed her concerns, but he felt it too, that sense of being observed not physically, but procedurally monitored through systems and permissions and quiet oversight. The case took a darker turn in 2004, when a former accountant named Daniel Rook was found dead in his Brooklyn apartment, ruled a suicide. Rook had worked briefly for one of the firms Eleanor had investigated. His name appeared in Harrigan's notes, a minor figure, peripheral. But among Rook's belongings was a notebook filled with scribbled numbers and initials. Tucked between its pages was a business card, yellowed with age. Eleanor Whitman, junior editor. It was the first physical link between Eleanor and someone inside the financial machinery she had been studying. Harrigan pushed to have Rook's death re-examined. The request went nowhere. The ruling stood. Suicide. Case closed. The notebook disappeared into evidence storage, another object swallowed by process. Harrigan began to understand something then, something Eleanor might have realized too late. This wasn't a case with a single villain, a lone mastermind to unmask. It was a system, diffuse and resilient, designed to absorb losses and neutralize threats without leaving fingerprints. People like Eleanor weren't killed in dramatic fashion. They were erased. Their lives interrupted so cleanly that doubt would always linger, that no narrative could fully cohere around their absence. In 2007, Harrigan was reassigned again, this time to a different unit entirely. The message, finally, was unmistakable. He boxed up his notes, made copies he kept at home, told himself he'd continue on his own time. But time has a way of slipping away. New cases arrived. Life intruded. The edges of Eleanor's story softened, even for him. And yet, every few years something would surface. A name in an indictment, a familiar structure in a financial report, a rumor passed between retirees over coffee. Each fragment reinforced the same conclusion. Eleanor had stumbled into a current far stronger than she realized, and once caught, there was no rescue. By the mid-2010s, true crime media rediscovered cold cases, mining them for content, reframing old tragedies for new audiences. Eleanor's story appeared briefly on a podcast, then in a magazine feature. The narrative was simplified, dramatized, stripped of its nuance. Listeners speculated. Commenters debated theories, but the core remained untouched. No one knew where she was. No one knew exactly what she had seen. Mark Whitman listened to one of those podcasts late one night, sitting alone in his apartment, and for the first time in years he felt something shift. The host mentioned the note, the warning, the missing manuscript. Mark realized that the story, as it was being told, was incomplete in a fundamental way. It focused on the mystery of Eleanor's disappearance, but not on the reason for it. Not on the thing that had frightened powerful people enough to make her vanish. He reached out to Harrigan. The two men met quietly, without fanfare, exchanging what they knew, filling gaps, aligning timelines. Harrigan shared his suspicions. Mark shared letters Eleanor had written, passages that hinted at frustration, at moral conflict, at a sense of responsibility she hadn't known what to do with. Together, they formed a picture that was still incomplete, but clearer than it had ever been. Eleanor hadn't just looked. She had understood. And understanding in that world was unforgivable. As they parted, Harrigan felt the old weight settle back onto his shoulders. The case wasn't officially reopened. No announcement was made. No press conference held. But something had changed. The story was no longer just about a woman who disappeared. It was about a system that ensured she never came back. In New York, crimes like that don't leave bodies in alleys. They leave absences that echo, unanswered questions that linger long after the paperwork is filed away. Eleanor Whitman became one of those echoes, a reminder that some cold cases aren't unsolved because of a lack of evidence, but because the truth itself is too dangerous to hold. By the time the city crossed into the new decade, Eleanor Whitman's disappearance had become the kind of case people spoke about in lowered tones, not because it was famous, but because it felt unfinished in a way that made conversation uncomfortable. It lingered like an unresolved chord, a note that never quite faded. Officially, nothing moved. Unofficially, the case kept breathing through fragments, through people who couldn't forget what they had seen or sensed, through patterns that resurfaced where they weren't supposed to. Mark Whitman carried that weight daily. He wasn't a detective, wasn't trained to see what police saw, but grief sharpens perception in its own brutal way. After meeting with Harrigan, Mark began rereading Eleanor's old journals, notebooks he had boxed away years earlier because they hurt too much to open. Now he read them slowly, deliberately, as if decoding a second language. Eleanor never wrote explicitly about fear, never named threats, but there were shifts in tone he hadn't noticed before. Shorter sentences, abrupt endings, notes about calls that felt wrong. A single line underlined twice that made his chest tighten. Some doors don't want to be opened, but once you see the crack of light, you can't pretend it's dark again. The entries stopped abruptly 2 weeks before she vanished. Mark began mapping her final months, layering her personal notes over what Harrigan had shared. Dates aligned in uncomfortable ways. Her interest in the anonymous non-fiction proposal intensified around the same time her tone darkened. She mentioned meeting someone for coffee who knew more than he should and seemed relieved to finally talk. No name, no description, just that uneasy relief, followed by silence. Harrigan, now technically retired, felt the pull again. He told himself he was helping a grieving brother, nothing more, but the truth was simpler. He had never let the case go. He had just learned how to live with it. Together, they began reaching out quietly, carefully, to people who might still remember, who might feel safer talking now that time had dulled the edges of risk. Most doors stayed closed. One former colleague of Eleanor's agreed to meet, only to cancel an hour before, citing illness. A second said he remembered nothing, his voice flat, rehearsed. A third talked freely until Mark mentioned the manuscript, at which point the man's demeanor shifted, eyes darting, words tangling, before he abruptly ended the call. The pattern was unmistakable. Fear didn't age the way memories did. It stayed fresh. Then came the anomaly. A woman named Claire Hensley contacted Mark after reading a brief article about Eleanor online. Claire said she had worked briefly as a temp in Eleanor's publishing house in 1995, assigned to clerical overflow. She remembered Eleanor because she had asked unusual questions not about manuscripts but about sources, about where certain submissions came from, how they were logged, who handled anonymous material. At the time, Claire thought nothing of it. Looking back, it felt deliberate. Claire agreed to meet Harrigan and Mark in a quiet cafe in Queens, far from Manhattan offices and old routines. She was nervous, hands wrapped tightly around her cup. But once she began talking, the words came quickly, as if she had been waiting years for permission to remember. She recalled seeing Eleanor photocopying documents late one evening, her expression focused, almost grim. When Claire asked what she was working on, Eleanor hesitated, then said softly, "Something that doesn't want to be understood." Claire also remembered a man who came by the office once, asking for Eleanor. He didn't sign in. He didn't wait. He left after a brief conversation in the hallway. Claire couldn't describe his face clearly, only his presence, the way people seemed to part around him instinctively. Confident, controlled, the kind of man who expected cooperation and usually received it. Harrigan felt a familiar chill. He had heard variations of that description before, not tied to a specific suspect, but to a type, an archetype common in cases that never quite broke open. The facilitator, the fixer, the man who didn't give orders so much as imply consequences. With Claire's permission, Harrigan pulled old visitor logs. As expected, the man wasn't listed, but security footage from that era, archived and degraded, showed a figure matching her description entering and leaving the building on the day in question. His face was indistinct. His posture was not. The footage didn't prove anything. It didn't have to. Confirmed instinct. Around the same time, a separate thread resurfaced unexpectedly. A journalist named Alan Mercer, known in the late 1990s for aggressive financial reporting, reached out to Harrigan after hearing rumors he was revisiting old cases. Mercer had once chased a story involving shell corporations and offshore accounts that mirrored the structure Eleanor had documented. He said he'd received anonymous tips back then, documents mailed without explanation, data too precise to ignore. He had been closer than he realized, before his editor killed the story without warning. No justification, no negotiation, just a flat refusal and a reassignment. Mercer admitted something he had never said publicly. After pushing back, after asking too many questions, he had been followed. Not obviously, not dramatically, just enough to notice patterns. The same car, the same pause on the line when he answered calls. The pressure had been subtle, professional, effective. He stopped digging. He moved on. Eleanor, he realized now, had not. The pieces were aligning not into a neat solution, but into a clearer shape. Eleanor had intersected with an information pipeline that fed journalists, regulators, and insiders selectively, a pipeline designed to leak just enough to control outcomes. When Eleanor began connecting dots instead of passing documents along, she disrupted that flow. She became unpredictable, and unpredictability in that world was a liability. Still, there was no proof. Nothing that could survive a courtroom or even an internal review. Everything existed in the realm of implication, of shared understanding without documentation. Harrigan knew that terrain well. It was where most powerful crimes lived, just beyond the reach of formal accountability. Then, in 2011, something shifted. A sealed civil case was quietly unsealed following a bankruptcy proceeding involving one of the shell firms Harrigan had tracked years earlier. Buried in thousands of pages of filings was a deposition transcript from 1996, never referenced publicly. In it, a junior executive mentioned, almost in passing, an editor problem that had been resolved before it escalated. No names, no details, just that phrase, resolved. Mark read the transcript 3 times, his hands shaking. Harrigan read it once and closed his eyes. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even an admission. But it was the closest thing they had ever seen to acknowledgement. Eleanor hadn't disappeared by accident. She had been dealt with. They brought the document to the department. The response was polite, restrained, non-committal. The statute of limitations had passed on most relevant charges. Key individuals were dead or unreachable. The language was too vague. The case, they were told gently, could not be reopened on implication alone. That word again. Alone. Outside the building, Mark felt something inside him finally fracture. Not into despair, but into clarity. The system was never going to give Eleanor justice in the way people imagine justice. There would be no handcuffs, no verdict, no neat ending. But that didn't mean the truth had to remain buried. He and Harrigan began documenting everything. Timelines, testimonies, patterns. Not for court but for record, for history, for anyone who might one day look back and wonder why a woman vanished without a trace in the richest city in the world. They weren't trying to accuse. They were trying to preserve. As the file grew, so did the sense of unease. Harrigan noticed small disruptions again. Emails that failed to send. Files that corrupted unexpectedly. A polite but firm inquiry from a former colleague asking what exactly he was working on these days. The pressure was weaker now, less precise, but it was still there, like an echo that refused to die. One evening, Mark returned home to find his apartment door ajar. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed, except for a single sheet of paper placed neatly on his kitchen table. It was blank. No message, no warning, just the implication. He didn't tell Harrigan at first. He didn't tell anyone. He locked the door, sat down, and stared at the paper until the city lights flickered on outside his window. He understood then what Eleanor must have felt in her final days, that quiet, suffocating realization that knowledge itself could become a threat. But Mark didn't stop, because some stories demand to be carried forward, even when the cost is clear. Eleanor Whitman had looked where she wasn't supposed to look. She had understood what she wasn't meant to understand. And while the city had tried to erase her for it, the truth she uncovered refused to stay silent. In New York, power rarely announces itself. It whispers. It redirects. It resolves problems quietly. And for decades, Eleanor's case had been one of those problems, neatly filed away, unresolved but controlled. Until the people who remembered her decided that silence was no longer an option, and that even without answers, the act of remembering could still be a form of resistance. Silence, Mark Whitman learned, was never empty. It was crowded with intention. After the blank sheet of paper appeared on his kitchen table, his apartment felt different, as if the air itself had been rearranged. Nothing had been taken, nothing broken, but the message was unmistakable. Someone knew where he lived. Someone knew what he was doing. Someone wanted him to understand the boundaries that still existed, even decades after Eleanor vanished. He didn't call the police. He didn't tell friends. He waited 3 days before telling Harrigan, measuring his words carefully, watching the older man's face harden as he listened. Harrigan didn't ask questions. He didn't offer reassurance. He simply nodded, the way men do when something confirms what they already feared. "It's how they work," Harrigan said quietly. "They don't stop you. They remind you." The reminder only sharpened Mark's resolve. If the goal had been to frighten him into silence, it misfired. Fear had already done its worst years ago. What remained now was something colder, steadier. Determination stripped of illusion. He and Harrigan agreed to change their approach. No more quiet inquiries. No more half measures. If the system wouldn't move internally, they would force the story into the open. But exposure required leverage, and leverage required something undeniable. They began by revisiting the manuscript's shadow, reconstructing it from memory, notes, and secondary traces. Harrigan contacted 2 retired detectives who had briefly handled the original evidence before it disappeared. One remembered a specific diagram, hand-drawn, showing money looping through 3 jurisdictions before returning to its point of origin. Another recalled a name partially obscured, something Eastern European, possibly Slavic. Neither could be certain. Memory, after all, degrades, but patterns endure. Mark combed through Eleanor's old floppy disks, relics of a vanished era, stored in a shoebox in his closet. Most were unreadable, corrupted by time. One wasn't. It contained fragments of text, draft notes, unfinished thoughts. Among them was a list of initials paired with dollar amounts, and beneath it, a single line that made Mark's breath catch. If this is right, it explains why people disappear without noise. Harrigan recognized the structure immediately. It wasn't just laundering. It was influence management. Money moved not only to clean itself, but to position people, to soften regulators, to delay audits, to redirect attention. It was a system designed not to win outright, but to never lose. Eleanor hadn't just found a crime. She had glimpsed a mechanism. They needed corroboration, something external, something alive. That came unexpectedly through Mercer, the journalist. He had stayed quiet for years, built a different career, safer, more contained. But after reconnecting with Harrigan, old instincts stirred. He reached out to former sources cautiously, framing his questions as retrospective, academic. Most ignored him. One didn't. The source was a former compliance officer, now terminally ill, with little left to protect. They met in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and inevitability. The man spoke slowly, pausing often, but when he spoke, the words landed with precision. He described a network of problem solvers, intermediaries who handled situations that couldn't be addressed through legal channels. They didn't threaten overtly. They offered options. Silence in exchange for security. Cooperation in exchange for survival. Mercer asked about Eleanor Whitman. The man closed his eyes, took a breath. She was flagged, he said. Not because she was powerful, because she was careful. Careful people are dangerous. They don't panic. They document. He wouldn't say what happened to her. He claimed not to know specifics. But he confirmed the existence of a meeting in late 1995 where her name was discussed briefly, clinically, as an exposure risk. The language used wasn't violent. It didn't need to be. Resolved, contained, neutralized. The recording of that conversation, with the man's consent, became the closest thing they had to a confession. Still circumstantial, still deniable, but devastating in its calmness. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was administrative. Mark listened to the recording alone one night, sitting in Eleanor's old apartment, which he had kept all these years, unable to let it go. The walls felt thinner than he remembered. The city's noise pressed in from all sides. He imagined Eleanor sitting at the same table, listening to the same distant sirens, realizing piece by piece that what she was uncovering had no safe endpoint. The question that had haunted the case from the beginning returned with new urgency. Not how she disappeared, but where. Harrigan proposed a theory he had resisted for years, that Eleanor hadn't been killed in New York, that her absence, the lack of physical evidence, the clean break, suggested relocation rather than execution. A disappearance designed to look like erasure. New identities were harder in 1995, but not impossible for people with resources and access. Mark rejected the idea at first, felt like false hope, but as they revisited the facts, the theory gained weight. No body, no forensic trace, no confirmed sightings, but no evidence of violence either. Eleanor might have been given a choice: vanish completely or escalate the consequences. Would she have agreed? Mark reread her journals again, searching for clues. One entry stood out, written days before she vanished. I keep thinking about whether silence can be ethical. If stepping back saves others, does that make it right? Or does it make you complicit? It wasn't the voice of someone resigned. It was the voice of someone trapped between outcomes, none of them clean. If Eleanor had been forced underground, the tragedy wasn't just her disappearance. It was the theft of her agency, her identity, her future. Survival at the cost of existence. They began quietly checking records of women matching Eleanor's profile who appeared suddenly in the late 1990s, with limited histories, minimal documentation. It was a long shot, thousands of possibilities. Most led nowhere. One didn't. A woman living in the Pacific Northwest, name changed, age consistent, background opaque. She worked quietly as a copy editor for a small academic press. Lived alone. Avoided social media. No public photos. Her employment record began abruptly in 1997, with no references prior. Mark stared at the file for a long time. Harrigan cautioned restraint. They had no right to disrupt a life built on enforced anonymity, if that was what this was. If Eleanor had survived by disappearing, exposing her now could finish what the system had started. The ethical knot tightened. Truth versus harm. Closure versus consequence. In the end, Mark wrote a letter. Not accusatory. Not detailed. Just a name. His name. A memory only Eleanor would recognize. He sent it through a law firm, anonymously, with instructions that it be delivered without explanation. Weeks passed. Nothing. Then one morning, Mark received an email from an address that didn't exist the day before. 3 lines. I am alive. Please stop. I'm sorry. No signature. The relief hit first, then grief, then rage, then understanding. Eleanor had survived, but survival had come with a lifetime sentence. Silence wasn't just imposed. It was enforced through fear, through distance, through the knowledge that speaking would reopen doors that had been sealed at tremendous cost. Harrigan read the email and closed his eyes. That's the end of it, he said. For her. Mark nodded. He knew it was true. Whatever justice looked like now, it couldn't involve dragging Eleanor back into the light. But the story didn't belong only to her. It belonged to the system that had done this, and to everyone else who had been quietly removed along the way. They made a decision then. They would not name her. They would not reveal her location. But they would document everything else. The mechanism, the methods, the pattern. They would publish not a conclusion, but a warning. Because Eleanor Whitman had not disappeared by accident. She had been processed, managed, neutralized. And in a city that prides itself on reinvention, her forced rebirth was the darkest kind of success story. Proof that some cold cases are only unsolved because the solution is too unsettling to accept. After the email arrived, the world did not change the way Mark expected it to. There was no sense of completion, no cinematic release of tension, no clean line drawn under years of uncertainty. The city outside his window moved the same way it always had, horns blaring, footsteps echoing on concrete, lives intersecting and diverging without pause. Eleanor was alive, somewhere, but she was also gone forever, and that paradox settled into Mark's chest with a weight that never fully lifted. He read the message again and again, each time hearing a different tone in its brevity. Relief sharpened by fear, apology shaped by necessity. The plea to stop wasn't a rejection. It was protection. Eleanor wasn't asking for distance because she didn't care. She was asking because caring had once nearly destroyed her. Harrigan understood immediately. He had spent his career watching people compromise with reality, learning which battles could be fought and which would consume everything around them. Eleanor's survival was not a victory in the traditional sense. It was a negotiated outcome, one that came with terms still very much in force. The first thing they did was lock everything down. Files were duplicated, encrypted, stored offline, divided so that no single breach could erase the record entirely. Harrigan insisted on redundancy, on physical copies sealed and hidden, on dispersal rather than consolidation. If the system that had silenced Eleanor was still functional, then any truth that challenged it had to be resilient. They also changed their language. Eleanor's name was removed from working documents, replaced by neutral markers. Dates were generalized, identifiers blurred. The goal was not to expose her, but to expose what had happened without triggering the same response that had erased her in the first place. Mercer began drafting the outline of a long-form investigation, one that avoided accusations and focused instead on patterns. No villains, no smoking guns, just structures, timelines, incentives. He framed it as an examination of how power insulated itself in the late 20th century, how accountability was redirected rather than denied, how problems were solved quietly when noise threatened stability. Editors were cautious, lawyers cautiouser. The story moved slowly, shaved down by concerns, rewritten to remove anything that could be construed as a direct claim. It frustrated Mercer, but Harrigan reminded him that survival sometimes required patience, the same lesson Eleanor had learned the hard way. While the article crawled through legal review, Mark grappled with something more personal. For years, his grief had been anchored by uncertainty. Now that uncertainty was gone, replaced by a truth he couldn't share, couldn't act on, couldn't even fully process. He couldn't tell his mother that Eleanor was alive, not without endangering her. He couldn't mourn properly because mourning implied finality, and Eleanor existed in a state beyond that. Grief without a body, relief without reunion. It was an emotional purgatory. He visited Eleanor's old apartment often, sitting in the quiet, letting memories surface unbidden. He thought about the choice she must have been given explicitly or implicitly: disappear and live, or stay and face consequences that would ripple outward. Eleanor had always been careful, always thought beyond herself. Mark understood now that her final act of care had been choosing silence. That understanding didn't make it easier. As months passed, small signs suggested that whatever pressure had once been exerted was loosening. Harrigan noticed fewer disruptions. Mercer stopped feeling followed. Mark's apartment remained untouched. Either the system believed the threat had passed, or it had adapted, satisfied that the essential condition, Eleanor's silence, remained intact. That was when Mercer's piece finally ran. It wasn't explosive. It didn't trend overnight. It didn't name names. But it landed with a quiet force among people who knew how to read between lines. It described a missing editor in the 1990s only briefly as a case study, then widened its lens to examine a recurring phenomenon: how individuals who identified systemic risk were neutralized not through violence but through displacement. Careers stalled. Reputations eroded. Identities dissolved. The phrase administrative disappearance appeared midway through the piece, and for those familiar with the terrain, it said everything. Reactions were muted publicly, intense privately. Mercer received emails from academics, former regulators, even a few retired executives, all saying variations of the same thing. Yes, this happened. No, it was never written down. Some thanked him. Others warned him to stop while he was ahead. One message stood out. It came from an address that resolved briefly, then vanished. You're circling the right shape. Don't fill it in. Harrigan read it and exhaled slowly. That was confirmation enough. The cold case unit, prompted by renewed attention, conducted a nominal review of Eleanor Whitman's file. The conclusion remained unchanged. No new evidence. No actionable leads. Case status: unresolved. The official record did not bend. It didn't need to. The truth they were uncovering didn't live there. Mark's mother passed away the following year, still believing her daughter had vanished without explanation. At the funeral, Mark felt the full cruelty of the silence Eleanor had chosen. It protected her, but it also stole something irreplaceable from the people who loved her. He stood by the grave and wondered if Eleanor knew that cost when she made her decision, or if she had only seen the immediate horizon. That night, Mark received another email. I'm sorry about your mother. I wanted to come. I couldn't. No further explanation. None needed. Mark replied once. "I understand. I hope you're safe." There was no response. Years continued to pass. The world shifted. Financial systems evolved. New scandals erupted, louder, messier, more theatrical. The mechanisms Eleanor had uncovered didn't disappear. They adapted, learned from exposure, became more sophisticated. Harrigan watched it all from a distance, retired now in more than name, but still alert, still cataloging patterns in his mind. Sometimes he wondered what would have happened if Eleanor had chosen differently, if she had gone public immediately, if she had refused the terms she was likely offered. The answer, he suspected, was not heroic. It was tragic. Systems that quiet can afford to wait. They don't need to win quickly. They just need to endure. One evening, years later, Harrigan and Mark met for what they both understood might be the last time. They were older now, slower, their shared mission winding down not because it was finished, but because there was nothing left they could do without causing harm. "We didn't solve it," Mark said. Harrigan shook his head. "We understood it. That's different." Understanding didn't bring arrests or closure. It brought context. It reframed Eleanor's disappearance not as a failure of investigation, but as evidence of a system operating exactly as designed. Cold cases like hers weren't accidents. They were byproducts. As they parted, Harrigan felt the familiar ache of unfinished business, but also a strange peace. Eleanor had survived. Her truth partially had survived. That was more than many ever got. Somewhere, Eleanor Whitman continued living a life that no longer bore her name. She edited words quietly. She stayed in the background. She obeyed the rules imposed on her existence. The system had won in a sense, but not completely. Because despite everything, the story of what had happened refused to disappear entirely. In New York, cold cases often linger because no one knows what happened. Eleanor's lingered because too many people did. And that knowledge, fragmented and shared in whispers, became its own kind of resolution, an acknowledgement that not all crimes end with sirens, and not all justice arrives wearing a badge. Some endings are silent. Some truths are survivals rather than victories. And some cold cases are only solved when you realize that the answer was never missing, only buried under layers of power, patience, and fear that learned long ago how to erase without killing. Time passed in the way it always does when a truth has nowhere left to go. Quietly, without ceremony, the city kept changing its skin, neighborhoods rebranded, skylines adjusted, scandals replaced by newer scandals. But the mechanisms Eleanor Whitman had brushed against never truly vanished. They learned, they refined, they became better at looking harmless. And that, Harrigan believed, was the most dangerous evolution of all. Mark tried to build something resembling a normal life. He changed jobs, moved apartments, learned how to speak about Eleanor in the past tense without feeling like he was lying, and in the present tense without giving anything away. It was a balancing act that demanded constant vigilance. Every conversation carried the risk of too much truth. Every silence carried the weight of withholding. He became fluent in omission. The emails from Eleanor stopped entirely. Not gradually, completely. At first, Mark checked obsessively, refreshing his inbox late at night, convincing himself that silence was temporary, that it meant safety. Eventually, he accepted what Harrigan had warned him about years earlier. Contact itself was the risk. The longer the silence held, the more likely Eleanor remained untouched by the machinery that had once closed around her. Still, the absence gnawed. In 2019, a new development rippled through financial and legal circles, subtle enough to escape mainstream headlines, but loud enough for those who knew where to listen. A sealed federal inquiry into legacy laundering networks from the 1990s was quietly reopened. Not with the goal of prosecution, but of historical accounting. Patterns were being traced, structures mapped. The past, it seemed, was being audited. Harrigan noticed the signs immediately. Old names resurfacing. Familiar corporate skeletons dusted off. Consultants hired who specialized not in enforcement, but in narrative containment. He felt the old hum again, that low vibration of proximity to something dangerous. Then Mercer called. I think they're circling it again, he said. Not her. The system. That distinction mattered. Eleanor's anonymity had held for decades. But systems, unlike individuals, left footprints no matter how careful they were. The inquiry wasn't interested in victims. It was interested in architecture, in how money and influence had been routed when oversight was weaker and ambition sharper. Mercer had been approached by a research team affiliated with the inquiry, asked to consult informally on historical context. They wanted to understand how certain patterns had gone unnoticed for so long, how whistleblowers and analysts had been sidelined without obvious retaliation. Mercer didn't mention Eleanor. He didn't need to. The questions told him everything. Mark listened as Harrigan explained the situation, his voice measured, cautious. This kind of review doesn't want stories, Harrigan said. It wants diagrams, flows. If she stays out of it, she stays safe. Mark nodded, but a familiar anger flared. Eleanor had sacrificed everything to avoid exposure, and now the system that had consumed her was being studied in abstraction, reduced to charts and lessons learned, as if the human cost were incidental. A week later, Mark received a letter. Not an email, not anonymous. A physical envelope, postmarked from another state, addressed to him in careful handwriting he recognized instantly. Inside was a single page. I heard they're looking backward again. Please don't let them find me. I'm tired. I just want this life to stay mine. There was no apology this time. No explanation. Just exhaustion. Mark felt the weight of decades compress into that one sentence. He didn't reply immediately. He didn't know how. Any response felt dangerous. Any reassurance felt hollow. He carried the letter with him for days, folded carefully in his pocket, rereading it in quiet moments, letting its simplicity cut deeper than any confession. He brought it to Harrigan. They won't, Harrigan said after a long pause. They don't know where to look. And even if they did, it would open questions they don't want answered. That was the paradox. Eleanor had become too expensive to acknowledge. Her existence complicated narratives. It implied coercion rather than oversight failure. It suggested solutions rather than mistakes. Institutions preferred errors. They could be corrected. Solutions implied intent. The inquiry progressed without incident. Reports were published. Language was careful. Words like systemic opacity and informal influence channels appeared repeatedly. No individuals were named. No disappearances acknowledged. The past was sanitized, folded neatly into academic distance. But the ripples reached farther than expected. A young analyst newly assigned to the inquiry reached out to Mercer privately. She asked about the human side, about the people who had vanished from records, whose careers ended abruptly, whose names appeared briefly, then disappeared. Mercer hesitated, then answered carefully, emphasizing uncertainty, patterns rather than specifics. The analyst persisted. Did anyone ever survive it? She asked. Mercer didn't answer right away. He thought about Eleanor, about the cost of survival, about silence as currency. Yes, he finally said, but survival wasn't free. The analyst thanked him. The conversation ended. Weeks later, Mark received a final email from Eleanor. They asked someone I know questions. Not about me. About before. I think this is as close as it gets. Please let it end here. Mark typed a reply, deleted it, typed again. In the end, he sent only 3 words. It ends now. And he meant it. Harrigan destroyed his remaining physical copies that night, feeding papers into a shredder slowly, deliberately, watching years of accumulation reduced to confetti. He kept nothing identifiable, only memory. At his age, memory felt safer than documentation, harder to subpoena, easier to carry quietly. Mercer declined further involvement. He published nothing more on the subject. The story had reached its natural limit, the point beyond which illumination became harm. The inquiry concluded. Recommendations were made. Safeguards proposed. The machinery absorbed the critique and continued, marginally altered, fundamentally intact. That was how it always worked. Mark stored Eleanor's letters in a fireproof box and sealed it. He stopped revisiting her apartment. He stopped rereading her journals. He allowed himself, finally, to grieve the life they would never share again, even if she continued living somewhere under a different name, a different gravity. Years later, when people asked about the case, about the New York cold case that never quite made sense, Mark learned to say, "Some stories don't end the way people expect." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Eleanor Whitman became a footnote in official records, a paragraph in academic studies, a whisper in investigative circles. Alive but erased, safe but silenced. A solution that could never be acknowledged without exposing the method. In the end, the case wasn't solved by arrests or revelations. It was solved by containment, by understanding the boundaries of what truth could be carried without detonating the lives attached to it. New York, vast and adaptive, swallowed the final echoes as it always did. And somewhere far from the city that had almost destroyed her, Eleanor Whitman continued editing words, choosing them carefully, understanding better than anyone alive that language could be both a weapon and a shield, and that sometimes the most powerful sentence you can write is the one you never let anyone read. The city never acknowledged closure, but closure arrived anyway, slipping in quietly, unannounced, like a fog rolling off the river at dawn. Not resolution, not justice, something thinner, more fragile, a sense that the past had finally decided to stop knocking. For Mark, that silence felt unnatural at first, like standing in a room where a machine had been running for years and suddenly shut off. No hum, no vibration, just air. He woke up one morning realizing he hadn't thought about Eleanor in hours. The realization itself startled him. Guilt followed immediately, sharp and instinctive, as if forgetting, even briefly, were a betrayal. He sat on the edge of his bed, listening to the city outside, traffic already thick, horns layered over distant sirens, New York reminding him that nothing truly stops. It only gets louder or quieter. The cold case still existed in public memory, but in a distorted form. Podcasts speculated. Comment sections filled with theories that grew wilder by the year. Some insisted Eleanor had been murdered and the body hidden by corrupt officials. Others claimed she had been a double agent, that her disappearance was staged, that she had been extracted. The truth sat somewhere adjacent to all of it, close enough to cast a shadow, far enough to remain untouchable. Mark stopped correcting people. Correction required engagement. Engagement invited questions. And questions were how doors reopened. Harrigan's health declined that winter. Nothing dramatic. No single event. Just the slow erosion of a man who had carried too many unspeakable things for too long. When Mark visited him in the hospital, Harrigan looked smaller, as if the years had finally reclaimed their due. "You did good," Harrigan said, voice thin but steady. "You kept it buried." Mark didn't answer right away. The word buried carried weight. "She's alive," Mark said quietly. Harrigan smiled faintly. "That's not what I meant." They both understood. Survival and truth were not synonyms. Sometimes they were opposites. Harrigan died 2 weeks later. No obituary mentioned his role in the case. No accolades referenced the lines he'd walked between law and consequence. He was remembered as a diligent public servant, a man of procedure. The rest went with him. Mercer attended the funeral but didn't speak to Mark. They didn't need to. A nod was enough. A shared acknowledgement of an ending that had taken decades to arrive. In the months that followed, Mark felt the absence of tension more acutely than the absence of people. The constant low-grade alertness that had governed his adult life slowly faded. He stopped scanning rooms, stopped hesitating before answering unknown numbers, stopped flinching at unexpected mail. Peace arrived in fragments, uneven and unreliable, but real. Then the call came. Not from Eleanor. From a stranger. A woman introduced herself as a producer for a streaming documentary series focused on unresolved crimes of the 1990s. She said they were revisiting the New York case. New evidence. New angles. She asked if Mark would be willing to speak on camera, to share his perspective as someone close to the victim. Mark felt the old machinery shudder back to life, distant but unmistakable. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said. She pressed gently. She mentioned public interest, closure for audiences, the importance of storytelling. Mark almost laughed. "There is no closure," he said, "and the story doesn't belong to you." He hung up before she could respond. Within weeks, others followed. Bloggers, independent journalists, amateur sleuths emboldened by algorithms that rewarded speculation over restraint. Mark changed his number. Again. He moved. Again. It felt absurd, repeating old habits for a danger that no longer truly existed, but instinct rarely consulted logic. He reached out to Mercer, who confirmed his suspicion. The documentary was real, well-funded, aggressive. "They think they're close," Mercer said. "They're not, but they don't know that." "What do I do?" "Nothing," Mercer replied. "Attention burns itself out. It always does." Still, Mark worried. Not for himself. For Eleanor. He drafted a message, stared at it for an hour, then deleted it. Any warning would do more harm than good. If she was still living the life she'd chosen, she had learned to sense danger without being told. Silence was still the safest signal. The documentary aired 6 months later. It was slick, emotional, carefully vague. It hinted at corruption without naming names, suggested cover-ups without evidence, framed Eleanor as a martyr swallowed by a system too powerful to challenge. Viewers were outraged. Forums exploded. The cold case trended again. And then, slowly, interest waned. No arrests followed. No revelations. The algorithms moved on. Another mystery took its place. Mark watched one episode alone, late at night, curiosity finally overriding caution. He recognized none of it. The Eleanor on screen was a construct, stitched together from fragments and assumptions. Stronger, simpler, easier to mourn. The real woman, the cautious brilliance, the strategic silences, the impossible choices, remained invisible. He turned it off before the end. Years passed. Mark grew older. The city grew denser. Buildings replaced buildings. Names disappeared from storefronts. Sometimes, walking through neighborhoods that had once mattered, he felt like a ghost haunting his own past. Other times, he felt free. On a quiet afternoon, sorting through old files he'd long since stripped of sensitive material, Mark found something he didn't remember keeping. A draft Eleanor had written years before her disappearance. Not a report. Not analysis. Personal note, never sent. Spoke of fear. Of responsibility. Of the unbearable clarity that came from seeing too much too early. It ended with a line that stayed with him long after he folded the page away. "If I vanish, let it mean something, even if no one ever knows what." Mark understood then that the case had never been about solving anything. It had been about preservation, of lives, of futures, of the fragile boundary between exposure and annihilation. Some cold cases remain unsolved because the answer is too dangerous to name. Because the truth, if dragged into the light, would destroy more than it redeems. Because justice, in its purest form, sometimes demands restraint rather than action. New York absorbed the story the way it absorbed everything else, with noise, with indifference, with relentless motion. The city did not remember Eleanor Whitman, but it bore the quiet imprint of her absence, embedded in systems that learned, adapted, and pretended not to. And somewhere beyond its reach, a woman who no longer answered to that name continued living, quietly, deliberately, aware that survival was not an ending but a discipline, practiced every day in silence. By the time the city stopped talking about the case again, it had already rewritten it in its own image. What remained was not a disappearance but a legend, flattened by repetition, stripped of consequence, turned into content. That was how New York survived its ghosts. It retold them until they no longer screamed. Mark noticed the shift not through headlines, but through tone. The urgency drained away. The language softened. Tragic mystery replaced institutional failure. Unanswered questions stood in for responsibility. The cold case became safe again, a puzzle without teeth, something to be consumed late at night and forgotten by morning. That safety was an illusion, but it was a comforting one. Mark had learned to live with illusions. He took a job teaching part-time, a position far removed from analysis or investigation. No databases, no confidential briefings, just students, deadlines, and the mundane rhythm of academic life. It felt almost dishonest at first, like he was pretending to be someone else, but over time the role settled onto him naturally. There was relief in being ordinary. Still, the past resurfaced in small, unpredictable ways. A student once mentioned the case casually during a discussion about ethics and journalism, citing the documentary as an example of systemic suppression. Mark felt his pulse spike, just for a moment. He listened without reacting, watched the conversation unfold, noted how easily speculation replaced fact. When the class ended, he stayed behind, staring at the empty chairs, reminded again that truth rarely survived translation. That night, he dreamed of Eleanor for the first time in years. Not as she had been at the end, tired, guarded, but as she was before everything collapsed. Focused, animated, alive with purpose. In the dream, she was trying to explain something, but the words kept dissolving before reaching him. He woke with a dull ache behind his eyes and the familiar sense of unfinished business. He didn't tell anyone. Mercer faded from Mark's life gradually. Fewer calls, longer gaps between emails. Not estrangement, just entropy. They had been bound by a shared gravity that no longer exerted the same pull. When Mercer finally retired, he sent Mark a brief message. "Time to let it belong to history," it read. Mark understood the subtext. History could carry weight that individuals could not, could absorb blame, dilute responsibility, offer distance. Eleanor, wherever she was, remained unreachable. Mark stopped expecting otherwise. The silence had stretched long enough to become a constant, like background noise you only noticed when it disappeared. He assumed she had built layers between herself and the past so thick that even memory had to knock. Then, unexpectedly, something shifted. It wasn't contact. Not directly. It was an article. Buried deep in an academic journal Mark skimmed for work. A piece on institutional blind spots in late 20th century financial oversight caught his eye. The writing was precise, restrained, the arguments familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. The author used a pseudonym, but Mark recognized the cadence immediately. The careful framing, the deliberate ambiguity, the way conclusions stopped just short of exposure. It was Eleanor, not by name, not by admission, but by voice. Mark read the article 3 times, absorbing every nuance, every carefully placed omission. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a revelation. It was something more subtle and, in its own way, more dangerous. It described the system without indicting it, mapped vulnerabilities without pointing fingers. It was a warning disguised as scholarship. She was still working, still intervening, from a distance. Mark closed the journal and sat quietly for a long time. Relief washed over him first, then fear. The discipline Eleanor practiced required constant recalibration. Publishing, even anonymously, carried risk. Patterns could be traced, styles identified. The wrong reader could notice, but she had always known that. The article sparked limited discussion in academic circles. No headlines, no outrage. It blended into the background of policy debates and reform proposals, exactly as intended. Weeks later, Mark received a postcard. No return address, just an image of a coastline, indistinct and gray. On the back, a single sentence. "Some truths work best at low volume." That was all. Mark didn't reply. He didn't need to. The message wasn't an invitation. It was a boundary. He burned the postcard after memorizing it, watching the paper curl and blacken, thinking about how much of his life had been reduced to gestures like that. Small acts of erasure performed in the name of survival. The city moved on. New scandals erupted. New faces dominated the news. The 1995 case slipped further into obscurity, referenced only occasionally, usually inaccurately. For most people, it no longer mattered. For those who had lived inside it, it never stopped mattering. Simply learned how to stay quiet. Mark began writing again privately, not about the case directly, about systems, about silence, about the cost of knowing. He never published. The act itself was enough, a way of organizing what had no clean conclusion. Sometimes, walking home late, he felt the familiar tension return briefly, a flicker of old instincts reminding him that nothing truly disappeared. Power adapted. So did danger. But he also felt something else now. Distance. Perspective. Eleanor had survived by becoming smaller, quieter, harder to see. Mark survived by learning when not to look. In a city built on exposure, that restraint was its own form of rebellion. The cold case remained officially unsolved. Its solution, scattered across lives that could never be publicly connected. No court would acknowledge it. No archive would record it. But the outcome existed nonetheless, embedded in absences, in altered trajectories, in a woman who chose anonymity over vindication and a man who learned to measure justice by what it spared rather than what it punished. New York carried on, indifferent and immense, its streets layered with stories no one would ever fully uncover. And beneath the noise, beneath the spectacle, the unresolved truth of 1995 continued to breathe. Not loudly, not proudly, but steadily, enduring in the only way it could. By not demanding to be seen. The years compressed the way they always do when nothing explodes. Slowly at first, then all at once. Mark stopped counting how long it had been since the night everything broke open and never fully closed again. Time no longer marked progress. It marked distance. Distance from fear. Distance from urgency. Distance from the version of himself who once believed that truth, once uncovered, automatically mattered. New York taught him otherwise. The city didn't reward exposure. It rewarded timing. It rewarded silence when silence preserved order. It rewarded noise when noise redirected attention. The case from 1995 had been swallowed not because it was insignificant, but because it was inconvenient. Inconvenience was the one crime the city never forgave. Mark felt this most clearly on the subway, riding beneath layers of concrete and history, surrounded by strangers scrolling through stories designed to provoke and forget. Every so often, an old headline resurfaced on someone's screen, cropped, reformatted, stripped of context. A ghost rendered into clickbait. He would look away, resisting the impulse to explain, to correct, to say this isn't how it happened. Explanation implied obligation. Obligation reopened wounds. He learned to sit with the quiet instead. His teaching became more than a job. It became a discipline. He spoke to students about ethics without anecdotes, about responsibility without heroes. He emphasized uncertainty, the danger of narratives that promised clean endings. Some students found it unsatisfying. Others leaned forward, sensing something unspoken beneath his restraint. After one lecture, a student lingered. "Do you think the truth always comes out?" she asked. Mark paused. He chose his words carefully. "I think the truth often survives," he said. "But it doesn't always introduce itself." The student nodded, as if that answered a question she hadn't fully asked. That night, Mark dreamed again, but differently this time. There was no conversation, no urgency, just a cityscape at dusk, lights flickering on one by one, and the sense that something had finally settled into its proper place. He woke without the familiar ache. That, more than anything, unsettled him. The past had learned how to rest. News arrived quietly, as it always did now. Not through headlines. Through a memo shared in a professional mailing list Mark barely paid attention to anymore. A brief note about archival restructuring. Certain sealed records from the 1990s were being permanently reclassified. Not opened. Not destroyed. Reframed. Administrative language wrapped around decisive finality. The door wasn't just closed. It was being rebuilt as a wall. Mark forwarded the note to Mercer without comment. The reply came hours later. "Then it's done," Mercer wrote. "As done as it ever gets." There was relief in that, thin but unmistakable. The system had made its choice. Preservation over disclosure. Stability over reckoning. It was the ending Eleanor had anticipated long before anyone else understood the stakes. Mark wondered briefly if she knew. If somewhere, under another name, she had felt the same subtle shift. A release. A confirmation that the past had finally lost its teeth. He didn't reach out. He had learned that endings, like beginnings, didn't always require witnesses. The city, meanwhile, continued its relentless reinvention. Neighborhoods once associated with the case were unrecognizable now, their edges softened by money and distance. The places where Eleanor had walked, where decisions had been made that altered lives forever, were repurposed, renamed, forgotten. There was something merciful in that erasure. Something cruel, too. Mark passed one such building on his way home one evening. Now a glass-fronted co-working space buzzing with optimism and curated ambition. He paused, watching people inside type furiously at laptops, headphones on, unaware of the conversations that had once unfolded there. Conversations that had demanded impossible choices. He didn't feel anger, just a quiet acknowledgement of how thoroughly time repainted everything. Later that week, another postcard arrived. No image this time, just blank cardstock, the message written small, deliberate. "I don't publish anymore." Mark held it for a long time. The sentence carried weight far beyond its simplicity. It wasn't resignation. It was strategy. Visibility had served its purpose. Now invisibility reclaimed its value. He burned the card with the others. In the absence of new signals, Mark allowed himself to believe that Eleanor had found something resembling peace. Not happiness, not absolution, but equilibrium. A life calibrated carefully to avoid extremes. A life that did not invite scrutiny. He respected that. The documentary series that had once reignited public interest released a follow-up season years later, revisiting old cases with new insight. The 1995 disappearance was mentioned only briefly, reframed as an example of investigative limitations of the era. The tone was academic, detached. The outrage had cooled into analysis. Mark didn't watch. He no longer needed to monitor the narrative. The narrative had lost its power to intrude. Sometimes, though, the city reminded him of its capacity for sudden cruelty. A name dropped in passing. A familiar phrase echoing in a conversation not meant for him. Each time, the old instinct stirred, then settled. He had learned that vigilance did not require panic. Awareness did not require action. That balance had taken decades to master. On the anniversary of Eleanor's disappearance, an anniversary only Mark and a handful of others still remembered, he walked to the river. Not the original spot, not the dramatic one, just water and wind and the low thrum of traffic. He stood there as dusk deepened, watching reflections fracture and reform, thinking about how easily narratives hardened around moments, and how rarely they accounted for what came after. After survival, after adaptation, after the long, unglamorous work of staying gone. He thought about Harrigan, about Mercer, about the analyst who had once asked if anyone survived. He thought about the countless unnamed figures whose lives had been bent quietly out of shape by systems that never acknowledged them. Eleanor was not unique in that sense. She was simply visible enough once to almost be lost. The city didn't mourn them. It absorbed them. Mark turned away from the river as night settled fully, the skyline sharp against the dark. He felt something he hadn't felt before. Not closure, not justice, acceptance. The understanding that some stories ended not with answers, but with boundaries that held. The cold case would remain unsolved in official language. It would continue to attract speculation, curiosity, reinvention. But its true conclusion had already happened, far from cameras and courts, carried quietly by people who chose restraint over recognition. New York would never tell that version. It didn't need to. And somewhere beyond the reach of archives and algorithms, a woman who once saw too much had finally stepped back into shadow, trusting that the silence she left behind was not emptiness, but proof that the danger had passed. For Mark, that was enough. The city kept moving. And for the first time since 1995, so did he, without looking back.